May I invite yet another old friend, Janez Potocnik, to please come. I first met you in the context of circular economy, and that was many, many years back. And you're still very active, going strong, and co-chairing the UN resource panel on this. And 15 minutes if you can, please.
No, but I will be close.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sonny. First of all, I would like to thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. It's an honor and pleasure for me to be able to speak to you. The story which I will share with you, it's a bit different than the story which you have heard till now. Not saying that this one was not important, but it will be just shining to the development from a bit different angle. As you have heard, I'm co-chairing the International Resource Panel. Probably majority of you have never heard what is International Resource Panel. It's a kind of sister organization to IPCC, which deals with the climate change, and it's to most of you known, and to IPBS, which deals with the biodiversity loss. All are working under the UN auspices. So we are a kind of science policy interface. Scientists, which creates a kind of a critical mass of science which cannot be disregarded by politicians. Of course, you never have the guarantee, but we try to do something like that. How we are actually connected to the work which we are doing in Systemic, because I'm also one of Systemic partners. In Systemic, we seek to achieve our mission through a unique portfolio of activities. I will not go into details, but one of those activities is also coalition building. And when we look to the coalitions, we have 4 of them: Sustainable Business, Sustainable Development Commission, Energy Transitions Commission, which you have heard Adair speaking about it, very nice and important Food and Land Use Coalition, but one of those coalitions, it's also the one which is connected to the International Resource Panel. To be frank, without generous support from Dr. Zimwinkel, this would not be possible, and I would like to thank him very much for that it's possible also through the systemic help. But let me start with substantially from this. In the natural science academia approach, this approach, which is called DPSIR, it's very well known. D stands for drivers, P for pressures, S for state, I for impact, and R for responses. What is our problem in responses and in policy making too many times? We are too many times staying and focusing on the impact and state. Biodiversity loss, it's state. Even the climate change, it's state. Polluted air, it's state. Whenever you would say drivers and pressures, you are immediately in the field of human activity, and which, as we all know how it's called economics, and that's why it is essential that we do and work on this field if we don't want to have problems here, because that's how the things go. And why I'm mentioning that? Because the policy responses are different. If I give you just one example from a concrete European current policy making, it's linked to something which majority of European policymakers believe that it's the major problem of Europe, and by the way, it is. It's migration and security. How do we deal with the migration and security? We build higher walls around Europe. We put more security in our entrance, and if you would go to Brussels, thank God not to Innsbruck, you would find out that it's also more army on the street. That is dealing via the impact and state. If we would seriously want to deal with that policy in Europe, if I paraphrase the American president, then our policy would need to be Africa first. For the next 30 years, it would need to be Africa first, but it's not. So that's why I'm saying that when you look to that approach, it is essential to go to the drivers and pressures, because you actually remove the reasons why we landed as we landed. Few things about our world and our economy from a bit different perspective than you have heard till now. I will say just the essential things. I will not talk about all the problems which we are facing, biodiversity loss and the things which I have somehow already mentioned, but there is one essential thing which we have to understand. It's very nicely captured in this slide, by the Club of Rome, simplified after Herman Daly, which is saying that we have switched from an empty world, which was dominated by nature and by ecosystems, to a full world, which is dominated by humans and human activity. And for the first time in a human history, we actually live in a human socio-ecological system of planetary scope, which means that we are more interconnected, that we are more interdependent than ever, and as a consequence, also our collective responsibility and individual responsibility for the future has enormously increased. We should be simply aware of that fact. The other problem, which we also have to talk about, it's connected with the development trajectory of the countries. Here on the horizontal X, you have Human Development Index, which is actually showing you how good somebody is living. More right you are, better you are living. On the vertical X, it's the ecological footprint. So higher you are, bigger it's your environmental footprint. The dots are the countries. The dots surrounded red are European Union member states. And this corner here on the right-hand side, the green one, contains all the countries where people are living well within the planetary boundaries. So 0. The real problem is that normally in development path, we always go up, so we do the damage, and when we see that we cannot continue with that anymore, we start to go down. So there are three essential problems. Those countries here cannot imagine that they would repeat that kind of development pattern. Those countries here, Brazil, China, India, Russia, are the big chunk of the countries which are currently developing, and it's essential that they don't go our way. And the countries here bear a lot of responsibility. It's on us to show either we are ready and able to go down. And in many cases, when we talk about SDGs, people believe that SDGs are most problematic for least developed countries. No. They are the most difficult task for us, because we already have infrastructure, we already have a life which we have got used to, which we'll have to change. Not that we would live worse, but we will have to live differently. And I think that this is a major challenge for all of us. So this is a bit simplified what I try to say, what I see as one of the core problems in current economy. You know that we are living in a market economy. And what is really driving market economies are the prices, the signals which are given, and on the basis of which the equilibria with the quantities, it's then reached on the markets. So if you look that 1% of people own less than actually 90%, 1% owns more than 90%, it is pretty obvious that labor capital in many cases is undervalued. But what is even more problematic is that the natural capital in majority of the cases, it's not valued at all. So that's a signal which we are sending. And then this goes to markets, to producers, consumers. We apparently behave rationally, and then we are surprised that we are landing in economic model where we live in economic, social, and environmental imbalances. We shouldn't be surprised. It's pretty much a proof that the market is working. So many of the market failures which we later have to deal with, many of the regulation which we have to bring on the market, it's actually the consequence of the signals which we are sending to the market. These are two interesting conclusions from the work of International Resource Panel, which are a bit surprising. We claim, as the ones who are responsible for resources, that in the midterm, at least, there will not be the shortage of resources which will force us to live differently or reorganize our life and economies, except in specific cases which is already felt today by the companies that there is a shortage of this rare material and another. But what is the real problem is that environmental and health consequences caused by this excessive and irresponsible use of resources will be. China a few years ago didn't close 2,000 companies around Beijing because those companies were running out of steel. No, they closed it because those companies, with the use of that steel, were influencing on the air in Beijing in the way that it was unbearable. And that's why they needed to change the policies. And I think it's really important to understand that. The second is why those things are not happening more by itself. It goes very much to the price signals which I talked before. So there is a disconnect between the resource efficiency and economic efficiency. Naturally, they would need to go hand by hand, but they are not going, which means that some signals from the market are obviously not working in the right direction. So living well within the ecological limits, it's clearly the direction one has to go. So economics system should be the function of ecosystems, and ecosystems should basically be integrating the socio-technical systems providing us social needs and value. And if we would not have the problem which I already mentioned before, one of the major things which I consider as really problematic are environmental externalities. What are the environmental externalities? These are the costs which are already existing, but we deny them. Why? Because we prefer that they are paid by somebody else, either the health system, either, which is common case, that they are paid by the next generation, because there is an I think the next generation, as you know, cannot complain. And it's, in many cases, we are simply indebting future societies. While we have in Europe clear rules that we should not indebt when it comes to financial, budgetary issues, we have not clear rules that we would not indebt in environmental area. On the contrary, if you would look to the recent, I think half a year or 1 year back data published by OECD, OECD countries from the year 2000 till to year 2014, which was the last figure included in that, increased fossil fuel subsidies more than it was their growth rate. In all the times and dates where they talked all about the round table, how important it's to deal with the climate change. So this hypocrisy has to stop, or we will be in deep troubles. Profits are to a large extent privatized, and the costs to a large extent socialized. If you look to the growth rates, normally, as you know, we are all using GDP, and these are the figures for global growth rates 90-2010 in real terms. GDP growth was 2.0. More you include in those social and environmental aspects, so if you go to Human Development Index, Genuine Progress Indicator, Inclusive Wealth Indicator, more you see that actually the growth is lower. So it is reasonable to doubt into the growth which was achieved in the past. Is the growth which we are seeing in all the climate consequences, which were absolutely nicely explained by my previous two speakers, is that a real growth? Or is some of that growth simply because we maximize our current life and our current benefits? So my final message concerning that would be, it is not helping if you are walking faster, if you are walking in the wrong direction. So it helps a lot if you change the course. Now let's go to solution story, to the story of resource management and the role of the circular economy. By the way, 12 of 17 SDGs are directly connected to the natural resource management. You can connect also the rest if you wish, but these are just directly connected. One of the conclusions which emerged also from the IRP work is that, of course, trade-offs among these 17 goals are absolutely necessary and you cannot avoid them. But the best way to mitigate them is actually through the sustainable consumption in production, which would basically mean that we need to concentrate a lot on that, on the goal number 12, which is actually talking about how we should change the production and consumption systems. But this is a kind of intellectual slide which we use most in our International Resource Panel, which is basically saying, yes, we believe that human well-being can grow faster than the economic growth, but what is essential is that we decouple the economic growth from the use of resources, and that we decouple both the economic activity and resource use from environmental impacts. That's essential. So you know, any economist know that if you have had problem with not having growth figures, you use the proxy of energy increase or of any other resource increase, because this was always so connected and so close. And it's essential in the future that we decouple. If we do not decouple, and I will tell you later on the climate example, what would that mean? we will not solve our problems. Circular economy, it's a very good and nice instrument, and in Europe, of course, you need to promote it from a simple reason because the policymakers have internalized it, they are using it, but the circular economy, in the simplest way, it's using and keeping resources as long as possible in production and consumption cycle, and keeping their value high. On the left-hand side, you have renewable resources, and here are non-renewable finite materials. And it is one of the things which is where we normally confuse a bit in public is that they believe that recyclability, it's actually circular economy. It is, but recycling, it's the worst of the best. When you recycle, you have already used materials. So, how can you basically improve resource, how can you basically in practice the circular economy? You can design the products in a different way. You can differently organize your production process. You can try to influence through the consumer's behavior. You can try to change business models. All that is possible, and it works in different way, in different circumstances. But this was created by the growth within the report. It's so-called it's a very nice menu of business actions for the better economy. By the way, this was done by some people who are sitting here in the room, still under the McKinsey banner, together with Ellen MacArthur and the Sun Foundation. And also, the modeling is this making common sense when it comes to economic, social, and environmental consequences was done. And I will not go in detail, but all the results are showing that this is the case, and all the results which we have done also in the IRP are pointing in that direction. This was then continued with the work which was already done by Systemic, and it's the work on the identifying next wave of circular economy investment themes and opportunities, which is again very useful because it's pointing to the direction which we could and should use if we want to bear economic opportunities of this transition process. Finally, about five major things which, when you talk about circular economy, I believe you have to take into account. The first is, you need to talk also about the social aspects of economic transition. If we do not integrate social aspects, then this might, by developing countries, be seen as a kind of Western type of model which we try to push to them again. It is essential for them that we look at it from that angle too, that we use those possible solutions which are also friendly from the employment point of view. Second, circular economy and climate change. The things which we have heard till now were more or less connected to this. But if we have zero price energy, and if we increase the use of energy very high, what we will do? We will consume more products which will influence on land, water, and materials use, and that use will increase the use of the CO2. So with that, and without combining the two stories, we will not solve the issue. And this is pretty much essential also for the future developments, that those two stories, resource management, resource decoupling, and the carbon management are connected, because this story is extremely important, and the things which you are doing are wonderful and are shading a very important part of the issue, but I think it's really important to understand that this works only together. Then bioeconomy and the circular economy. Bioeconomy is currently a very popular trend. It's actually how to use renewable products. If you try to connect it to the circular economy, it's in essence this question: how you can strengthen one wing of the butterfly and weaken the other one, non-material to or material to bio-based. The real problem there is that bioeconomy can be as much dangerous as classical economy if it does not follow the rules of the circularity and sustainability. And many things which we are discussing, like plastics, food systems, land management, which are to a large extent also connected to the bioeconomy, needs to be very well taken and thought through, also with the circularity having in mind. Then the next one is urban systems and circular economy. Why I'm mentioning that? Because through that a lot of circularity could go. Sharing models, then mobility systems, waste recycling, sustainable buildings, energy efficiency, and the most important thing which you have already heard today, and it's also, we just published a report which is called The Weight of the Cities, so the requirements of resources till 2050. But the most important thing which we should not underestimate, the next wave of urbanization, it's in next 50 years. Then urbanization is more or less done. So if we do it wrongly, we are in deep, deep problems. So now it's time for those things. And finally, retaining value in the circular economy, I will show you one example which actually emerged from the work which was done in Sweden. I will explain you why this is important. Official statistics on plastic waste recycling in Sweden used by European Commission is 53%. But if you look to the value of end-use plastic each year, 10 billion Swedish crowns, and then you look actually how much of that value was retained, you find out that the value which is retained was 1.3 billion Swedish crowns, which leads you 13%. This is driving economy. These are our targets which we are setting. So we have a bit of non-consistency and creating, so we need to start thinking how to integrate that into circularity also. Responsibilities of the business sector, if we want that they would be aligned with the SDGs. From being a pure risk managers of their own companies, they really need to change to being socially responsible companies, managing their own responsibilities and the risk of society. And I think this is exactly what is the essence of the systemic, and also one of the reasons why I basically choose to join. To conclude, one of the conclusions from the World Economic Forum meeting this year was the challenge seems not to be one of not inadequate scientific evidence anymore, rather one of cooperation and implementation. And there is a deepening perception of a lack of synchronicity between economic and environmental policy responses. So if we are really so interconnected and interdependent, then we need to think about how to improve the governance on the global scale. And a lot is actually how to share sovereignty in a different way, how to raise sovereignty on a higher level. The best example is actually European Union. 70 years ago, we have decided that we are fed up with wars and conflicts. We set up European Union. We have enough of problems, that's clear, but we were successful in that. And that's what matters. Actually, the whole world is currently facing the same challenge. Are we ready to avoid wars and conflicts in the future? We have 3 existing Rio Conventions, climate change, biodiversity, and deforestation, and one proposal which I would do is, would we really not be in a need for a new instrument connecting existing conventions to the need of economic change? And is there a need for a natural resource management convention? I think it would be essential that we would go that way, because on one hand, you can't sell a product if in one country it's seen as remanufactured, in other countries it's seen as a waste. You need to unify those things. And what is also important is that we create a kind of educational tool which could be used to get developing countries on our side, that we would all embark in a system change needed when it comes to economics. Points which I would like you to remember: for the first time in human history, we face emergence of a single tightly coupled human socio-ecological system of planetary scope. It's about system change. Without leadership and improved global governance, SDGs are only wishful thinking. Transition to a new economic model integrating all pillars of sustainability should be in the center of our attention. Trade-offs among SDGs are unavoidable. Sustainable consumption and production is the most efficient strategy to mitigate them. Circular economy, it's a very good concept to operationalize it in practice. We should focus our attention on the pressures and drivers leading to worrying states and impacts. Change will not appear by waiting for the leadership of others. Be the leaders on your level of governance authority, in politics, business, making your investment decisions. If we are to avoid globally extensive and intersystemic crises and frequent conflicts, then let's get serious about implementing what we have agreed in SDGs. Change is unavoidable and humans are supposed to be intelligent, and it's high time to prove it. Some are saying that this is a story of gloom and doom. Actually, any transition is the best opportunity for those who dare for new innovation, and I would rather not talk about alternative because it's the story of gloom and doom. And this is the last slide. Will it be easy? Some of you have already seen it, but I like it very much. When Albert Einstein was asked, what is that mankind has stretched so far as to discover the structure of the atom, but we have not been able to devise the political means to keep the atom from destroying us, he replied, that is simple, my friend, it's because politics is more difficult than physics. And we should basically all remember that fact. Thank you.
Thank you. May I please invite Anna Köhl, who once again, as with the previous speaker, works at the intersection of business, academia, policy, and in this case, plastics. The microphone? You want this? It was yes. There you go.
Great, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So, I wanted to start telling you some shocking facts about plastic, but then I realized that most of you probably already know. We know it's harmful for the environment, and we know it's harmful for our health. And if we continue business as usual, there will be more plastics than fish in the sea by 2050. Nevertheless, we, or most of us, we continue our life as we used to. Maybe we started using plastic bags at the supermarket, or maybe we now bring our own reusable coffee cup to the coffee shop. But we still buy our shampoo packed in plastics, our toothpaste, and from time to time we also eat our lunch in takeaway plastics. But despite all our efforts to recycle, and Janez said before, recycling is the worst of all alternatives, today, worldwide, there's only 14% of all plastics recycled, and only 2% in closed loops, meaning that a plastic bottle will become a plastic bottle again. So what can we do? If creating more awareness doesn't work and recycling is not the answer. We have been preaching guilt and sacrifice for a really long time, and the changes we have achieved until now are too incremental, and the magnitude of the problem is too big. It's simply not the solution. We need to create something new, something circular. We need to create a circular economy for plastics, a new plastics economy, where materials are designed to stay in the loop. And I don't want to go into detail here because you already explained before. I want to continue with what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation did, besides many other things. They launched a crowdsourcing initiative tackling the question, how might we get products to people without generating plastic waste? And I think the important factor here is that we also have to look at the consumer, and we should take away the responsibility from the consumer. And we need to offer adequate solutions which are as convenient and as price competitive as current plastic solutions we use in our day-to-day habits. We need to have them and offer them. And this crowdsourcing initiative was a worldwide initiative where over 600 ideas were generated from people all over the world. And out of those 600 ideas, there were 14 winning ideas announced. And they now receive different kinds of support to implement and scale up those ideas. So you might wonder now what all this has to do with Innsbruck and me doing my PhD together with Martin at the Innovation Lab of Sustainable Resource Management. So for one of my papers, I work with the data of the crowdsourcing initiatives. and look at levers that can be pulled in order to make the outcome of such initiatives and the ideas to improve those ideas. And I have my personal motivation from my personal interest in that topic and the need I feel to act, to do something. And we've talked a lot about the big picture today. And as a student or as a simple person, I say, it's often hard to see the big picture and what can I as a person do. But doing my PhD in that topic, I came into contact with a just emerging academic network of people and scientists focusing on circular economy, and I realized that this topic is really just emerging, and every contribution matters, no matter how small it is. And now, no matter how small your little scientific thing you're doing, it actually moves, helps the whole society move towards a circular society and move towards the goal we all have. So my basic message today is standing here as a student, speaking to students, and I hope there are some out there, is that it actually can be fun to do scientific work if you're choosing a topic that matters to you personally, but also out to the world. So if you're doing just a seminar paper, your master, your bachelor thesis, or even your PhD, choose your topic wisely. Have fun and do something that matters. Thanks.
So we have some good news and some bad news. You've often heard there's a trade-off between quality and quantity. In this particular case, we have an excess of both. We have a number of very interesting, charismatic, insightful speakers, but they're great quantity and quality. And as a result of that, we're running about 15 minutes over schedule. If you think you're uncomfortable with that, please raise your hand. If you think you will stay till the end, given the quality of the discussion, and we haven't even got to the best part. The last panel promises pitting God versus science versus humanity, national and international versus local government. So I would really urge you to stay till the end. It's 15, 20 minutes, really, really well worth your time. One question for the panel is all we have time for. And who will that lucky person be? Please.
My question is about, aren't these suggestions and proposals made by a certain elite? And don't get me wrong, I like this elite a lot. But what I see in society is a big disconnect between an elite and the 99% others. And my question is, if we want to change something that matters in the coming 10 years or decade, what can we do that we can manage this disconnect between an elite and, not better is this elite than many other elites, of course, but what can we do to manage this disconnect?
Wonderful. A minute each, and could the last panel keep that in mind? Because in the last panel, we have the head of the Lutheran Church in Germany, we have the ex-chief scientific advisor to the British government, who are responsible for being able to communicate these high-level messages to a much broader audience, which, as you rightly said, is the really crucial point. But a minute each on this, please.
Well, I think it's a good question, and it's a question I personally always think of as well. And I think a solution is that we also have to look at the smaller improvements we can do. And it's, of course, important to look at the big picture, look where do we need to be in the next 10 years. But maybe we also need to look where are we tomorrow, and what can every single person of us can do, and communicate that better to the wider audience, and be maybe more specific about how good small improvements are, even though they may not make a big difference, but nevertheless, if we all do small steps together, there will be a big difference.
Yeah, there are good news and there are bad news. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are good news and there are bad news. Good news, bad news are that, of course, you are right, there is a disconnect. And we would absolutely need to move faster and further than we are moving. But the good news are that there are a lot of bottom-up initiatives, and there are a lot of, even in the policy making, you have quite some people who are understanding those things much better than they did in the past. So we should all on our level, as I said, don't wait for the leadership. Be the leaders, do whatever you can, try to influence, because every voice is needed, in particular when we need to press on our policy leaders. Normally in all the political campaigns we don't discuss those issues, which is tragical, because we normally discuss the issues which will not so much matter for your life. But the changes are coming. The real problem is how to move to the critical mass, and to the critical mass fast enough. Final thing which I would say, it's stay optimistic. There is one good reason why it makes sense. You will live longer.
May I just add to that? I mean, you saw the impact that one accidental discovery of the transistor in Bell Labs all those years had on our life. If you just look at the digital economy, it all originated with that one small accidental serendipitous discovery. If you look at the impact of the Me Too movement, which we are still only, I think, at the early phases of, that also just started with one individual. Anything and everything, be it revolutions to big societal shifts in attitude to huge scientific leaps of faith, often start small. And the one thing we know is it's impossible to predict where exactly the next big thing is going to come from. But it will come from some of you in this room. Can we please move, after the applause for the speakers, to a quick film about the Business Commission and impact?